Jangan, jangan. そっか。スタートね。
Welcome back everyone. We hope you had a nice lunch. So now, before we begin, we would like to inform you about the QR code on your table. So now it's ready for you to download the presentation. We will now begin our afternoon session. Please welcome Mr. Anu Vandana. He is the Director of Marketing and Innovation at OFA. Anu specializes in reactive innovation and functional nutrition solutions, particularly in gut health and mineral optimization, strategies for modern poultry systems. So today, Anu will talk about understanding the gut microbiome, the role of nutrition. Thank you, Anu. So over to you, Anu.
Thank you very much. Welcome all. I'm honored to be able to speak here today. I hope you all enjoyed a very good lunch. My name is Arne van der Aar. I work already for more than 22 years in OFA, and in most of that part also involved in the R&D program of OFA. But besides those 22 years in OFA, I actually grew up on a dairy farm. It's not chicken, but it's still an animal. So it's fair to say that I have close to 50 years of experience in the industry. And I hope to share a little bit from that today with you. I was invited to speak about feeding the gut microflora and the role of nutrition. And if you look at how I have set up my lecture for today, first I would briefly like to touch the microbiome as such and the importance now, but also towards the future. A few words on diagnostic tools and specifically some novel tools that have been developed, mostly focusing on biomarkers and ratios within the microflora. And after that, I will try to share thoughts coming from those ratios, how they can be linked to nutritional interventions mostly in relation to feed additives, because that's the specialism of our company. After the break, together with Professor Wiseman and other speakers, I will also be available for questions. So feel free to shoot them through the QR code. I will be happy to deal with them during that session or also afterwards. If you look at the gut microbiome, antimicrobial resistance is very important. It has been over the last 2 decades, but it will also be for the next 2 decades to come. If you look at antimicrobial resistance, it's mostly linked to inappropriate use of antimicrobials. In Europe, the ban of the first antimicrobial started already more than 25 years ago, and we see that that is now being followed by the majority of countries. But it doesn't stop there. And it's not only looking at antimicrobials for growth promotion that have been used. If we today look at the Netherlands, for instance, the government on frequent occasions makes appointments with the industry with the targets for the future to reduce also the theoretical use of antimicrobials. And why is that? If we use too abundant amounts of antimicrobials, bacteria will become resistant, and that will in the end lead to less availability of antimicrobials for human application. If you look then at reports from the United Nations Environmental Programme, and the latest update has been given in 2023, what you then see is that today the death course in humans related to antimicrobials is significant, but still rather small. Expectations, however, is that in the next 2 decades, up to 2050, it will multiply by 10 to 15 times, and it might become the #1 death cause in humans. And not to make you afraid, but if you look at the last report in 2023, the biggest increase is expected in Southeast Asia and in Africa. So I think it's, in that sense, an important effort, and if even the United Nations are pushing themselves behind it, I think it's only a matter of time that through local regulations that will have an effect on the industry as well. So there's a need for alternatives for antimicrobials. Then this slide, it's an infographic I hired from ABC Microbiome. It's a center of excellence in microbiome studies, both human and animals. And it gives quite some nice detailed information. Gordon already expressed the importance of viruses. There are approximately 5 times more viruses in our microbiome than bacteria. Interesting fact I found is that if we put all the microbes from our intestines from head to tail, you can go around the world 2.5 times. The weight of that is only 2 kilograms. So that's actually some interesting details. Also, if you look at the effect of the DNA in our microbiome, that's about 150 times our own DNA. So are we really who we think that we are, or are we managed by our microbes? And another interesting part, and you can see already that they publish abundantly the link of microbiome not only to our intestines, but also to our brain, our lungs, but it also works in productivity, in health, and in welfare. If I look then specifically at the figure here on the top right, the microbiome is medically more accessible and manipulable than the human genome. And I think that's an important part. They also state that about 90% of the diseases that we find somehow are related to our intestines. So if we want to action something on diseases, the gut is where we have to start. troubles, shifting to the next slide. Okay, then the gut barrier system. If you look at if we look at the gut barrier system, that's mostly set up with three ways. First of all, the microbiome barrier. So that's mainly in the lumen itself of the intestines. And there what you see is that on the top right, there's two ways how to address that. First of all, there's competitive exclusion. One can work, for instance, with probiotics on that. And secondly, also short-chain fatty acids have a direct effect on certain pathogens. We then look at how to prevent ourselves from pathogens or viruses coming in. There's also in the second phase the fistful barrier. So that's mostly the mucus layer of the epithelial cells, but also the tight junctions in between, organized by occludin and clouding, where the tight junctions are very important, preventing the next stage. Preventing bacteria to come in. Then lastly, if some pathogenic bacteria still manage to find their way through the lumen and the epithelial cells towards our bloodstream, there's still the immunological barrier, and there specifically in the intestines you have the dendritic cells. They recognize what is going on, and that can cascade into a series of cytokines and immunological cells such as macrophages to prevent us from becoming sick. Then insights in gut health. Looking a little bit at the time. What I would like to present is a variety of diagnostic tools, but also a novel one, where we as a company have been putting a lot of efforts in over the last 2 years. First of all, what was available from the past is first to start with necropsy scoring, and so done by veterinarians, opening the chickens, looking at lesion scores, for instance. Important work. One of the issues is that it's not very quantitative, it's subjective, but it has a quick time to show results, so it does help people to make estimations about gut health. In the second phase, histopathology, so you can also look at the cryptophyllide levels. Typically that takes a little bit longer, so up to 5 to 10 days, but quantitative, it's more easy to recognize. CFU counting, so then you look specifically at certain bacteria, you plate them on a medium, and after a couple of days you can see which bacteria are inside or not. Quantitative better, but if you look, for instance, at the options to scale, it has some limitations. Then conventional PCR, very detailed, so if you want to search for a very targeted species of a pathogen or a beneficial bacteria, gives you clear insights, but also there, scalability is limited. And then one of the latest advances probably is DNA sequencing. Very quantitative, it gives you huge amounts of data, in that sense very specific, very big depth of data. Processing time, however, is quite long, it's quite expensive, and one gets so much data that the interpretation sometimes is very difficult. People can put a PhD on that to really understand for certain bacteria whether they are beneficial or not and to which extent. Then new is quantitative PCR, ligation based. It's very quantitative, in that sense very actionable. It reaches quite a large amount of data, so the depth of data volume is quite big. It has a very quick response time, so just to give you an idea, it works quite similar to what we are used to as with COVID. Instead of swabbing the nose, it's a rectal swab in chickens or in poultry, in swine. It can be processed at a normal PCR machine. Once has been calibrated for the double ligation, and then if the PCR analysis is done, within 24 hours the report can be available. This also allows to get predictive values, and secondly, the mechanism is set up in such ways that it measures ratios as biomarkers, but interestingly is that that works as Lego blocks, so one can easily add another biomarker inside. Take a quick sip of water. So to give an idea about the ligation-based technology, if you look at classic PCR, if you look at the DNA marker for butyric acid production, one can find approximately 3% of what is inside the intestines. If you link 14 DNA markers for butyric acid production through ligation, one can find approximately 90% of the production capacity. So in that sense, ligating these markers gives a real advantage in not searching for specific microbiomes, but their functional effects. Doing so leads to biomarkers that can be set up in ratios. And the advantage of these ratios is that maybe there might be a difference between the absolute numbers of chickens in Brazil and chickens in Thailand and chickens in Belgium, but the ratios are quite often giving a very good indication whether an animal is healthy or not. So the biomarkers developed by this company, it's a startup from the Netherlands called Florates, a spin-off of the University of Wageningen. They are based on productivity. So what they measure there is the butyrate ratio. So that's the total of butyric acid producing microbes compared to the total microflora. Same they do for lactic acid bacteria. So they measure the amount of lactic acid bacteria compared to the total microbiome. And lastly, they compare both the butyrates and the lactylates. And sometimes an overflow there may also not be beneficial, and in that sense an important parameter to measure as well. On gut damage, what they can measure through this system is, for instance, the amount of epithelial cells on the intestine shedded into the environment. So comparing the host DNA with the microflora DNA gives you a ratio that gives, for instance, inside lesions in your intestines. And lastly, Enterobacteriaceae, they are measured as a ratio as an indicator for hygiene in the poultry house. Currently, they have run already more than 8,000 samples, mostly in boilers and in swine. They do that in field, but also in a controlled research project together with universities, and that has delivered so far 45,000 florates ratios, but the speed of increasing that is very high. This method has also been written down, so completely openness, and it has been submitted for peer-reviewed paper, which was published last year in the avian pathology, giving the scientific background. What I would also like to share today is a quick insight in a field study verification that was published early this year at the Australian Poultry Science Symposium. What they did there, they did a combination with a big flock study across the Netherlands. So they tested in total 36 boiler houses, 36 different flocks, different farms, and by veterinary routine they scored these in healthy flocks, in flocks with gut health problems, and in flocks with health problems but not related to to the intestines. They also measured this with this methodology through qPCR ligation based, and they measured then the gut damage assay, so looking at the host cells compared to the total microfloral DNA, and they also looked at the biomarkers for lactate and butyric acids. And then what we see there, first on the left, that's the measurement of the gut damage ratio. So what you see is that if we have the healthy flocks in green, they have a low gut damage ratio, but in the flocks with health issues related to the intestines, these gut damage ratios become much higher. And flocks with health issues but not related to the intestines, according to the veterinarians, are mostly behaving close to what we see in the flocks that are healthy. So that's a confirmation that this parameter gives clear insights, quick insights, in how the health status of the flock is actually at that point. Secondly, what is also interesting is the predictive value of this methodology. That is something you see on the right. So using the productivity index, looking at the butyric acid production and the lactic acid production, they scored the predictive value for final body weight testing at day 21. And they scored that to what they found in practice. And then you see that there's actually quite nice correlation. So in the future, I think if this database is being updated by more data points, it would even allow for logistic excellence. If you can score already at day 21, knowing when to take out the birds, it could be a big advantage for poultry processors as well. So that's my part about the diagnostics. Then the parameters I discussed. I would also like to share a little bit from our R&D program in the past, how that relates to gut health and how the interactions with certain feed additives and the microbes are or can be. First, looking again at butyrates. If you look at butyrate, Mopetical in 2016 published quite nicely how that relates to animal production and performance. There are basically three pathways. One of the classical ones, known by many people, is that actually butyric acid is an energy source for epithelial cells, specifically in the colon. And through that mechanism, it directly has an effect on absorption of nutrients. Part which is not so much known is that butyrates also are involved in the modification of hormonal regulation. And as such, an animal censoring in the hindgut the levels of butyric acid can actually action through gastric emptying rates, or even by increased pancreatic secretion, the absorption and the nutrient absorption in the near future. So that's a pathway that explains a little bit why butyric acid so much is involved in production traits. Lastly, there's a direct effect on the modification of microbes that can be done through mostly as a direct effect on the short-chain fatty acid itself. If you then look at how you can play with that in nutritional interventions, there's basically two options. That's the endogenous approach. So through probiotics, one can stimulate the production of butyric acid. Through prebiotics, one can stimulate the growth of butyric acid producing bacteria, but also enhancing on substrates. For instance, if you work with carbohydrate enzymes, you can influence also the amount of butyric acids produced in the hindgut. Specifically, the group of Professor Ducatel in Belgium has done a lot of work on that. So they also selected and published data on how one can steer endogenous butyrate production in gut. Second approach is exogenous approach. So if one sees that butyric acid is compromised, you can also consider adding butyrates to the diet. Historically, that was done with pure sodium butyrate salts, extremely smelling. Later on, they were first granulated to reduce the smell of processing. But at the last stage, also microencapsulated butyrates have been introduced already quite some time ago. That could even help steering the release location of the butyrates, depending on where the biggest need is. If you then look at the effects of probiotics, and I limited myself mostly to small form probiotics because that application is most commonly used at the moment in animal nutrition. Because small form probiotics, they have a better stability for storage, but also for pelleting and heat exposure, and also they are capable of surviving gastric passage. Today I would just like to share a little bit the effect on the microbes as such through enzyme production and lactic acid. So if you look at spore-forming bacteria, there is a few more, but we work mostly with Bacillus subtilis. These probiotics, they help to increase lactobacilli and thus lactic acid production in the intestines, but also they promote enzymatic activity. Through competitive exclusion, they can also reduce harmful bacteria, so not only work on healthy gut and productivity, but for instance, reducing ammonia for release to the environment, but for instance, also more ammonia in the litter can lead to more issues with chlor health, if you look at boiler nutrition. And in that sense, it can work on improved environment and through competitive exclusion also food poisoning bacteria, and therefore just bee quality and human safety. This is a quick overview of 13 studies that were done with Bacillus subtilis and then the effects on microbiome microbes in the intestines, and quite consistently what we saw there is an increase of lactobacilli. So therefore you can use probiotics to steer if you choose to steer on lactic acid instead of butyric acid, you choose a probiotic as such. Secondly, we also see the effect on pathogenic bacteria directly, which is Campylobacter, coliforms, and Salmonella. This is some unpublished data of some work we have done at Oklahoma State University. And here we measured the effects of different spore-forming bacteria, a lot of them Bacillus subtilis, but also a few others. And what is interesting to see is that a lot of these spore-forming probiotics have a big variety of enzymes they actually secrete in the environment. And in my view, that's a direct explanation why a lot of these spore-forming bacteria eventually lead to improved production traits, specifically feed conversion. Interesting is also that if we look at the different enzymes, the highest effect appears to be on lipases. And one of the products that in the next slide I will return on is Bacillus coagulans or Weismania coagulans. That is actually the only spore-forming bacteria that also produces lactic acid, but it also apparently is quite good in promoting lipase production as well as protease production. This is a study that we have done at the University of Antwerp in Belgium. And there we looked at the production of both L-lactic acid and E-lactic acid. L-lactic acid is the form that one typically finds in nature, with a very good promoting effect for gut health. D-lactic acid has some concerns because it can also be harmful. And interesting here is that we looked at a long list of potential probiotics, a few spore-forming ones, but also a lot of lactobacilli species, quite often not so favorable if you look at the application due to heat treatment, storage issues. What we see here is a confirmation that some species, such as Bacillus subtilis, but also Enterococcus faecium, they produce low lactic acid. If we look at the spore-forming bacteria, it's actually only coagulans that produces lactic acid to a serious level. And interesting, comparing coagulans, there is no production of the negative D-lactic acid. If we look at other probiotics, lactobacilli based, we do see that the production of L-lactic acid is good, but in quite some occasions we also see significant amounts of D-lactic acid occurring, so thereby limiting the total beneficial effect. So coagulants, in our view, is a nice concept to work on both short-chain fatty acids, but also enzyme production by spore-forming bacteria. And looking a little bit at the time, but I should be good. Then my last item, that is some things where we have looked at emulsification and the direct relation to the microbiome. There's two studies that have been published, peer-reviewed already in the early 2000s that I think are worth mentioning and looking at. The first one was a comparison of a diet with antibiotics and without antibiotics. And what you see then is that the withdrawal of antibiotics led to a higher level of Clostridium perfluens. As a result, there's a lower level of conjugated bowel salts, and that directly relates in a lower level of fat absorption or fat digestibility. If we look at the second study, done around the same time, there was a study where we looked at a limited microflora, so under SPF conditions in boilers, and conventional birds with a more complex microbiota. And then you see again that the microbial activity has an effect on the conjugated bowel salts, again directly translating into the fat digestibility. The reason I wanted to show this today is that in Europe, is it still working? Okay. In Europe, we changed, of course, to antibiotic-free diets, or at least for growth corrosion, around 2000. But that was also the time where people actually were starting to consider how these antibiotics actually worked. We have put them in the past because we saw practical results. But if you want to replace them, you should actually know how they work. And I think that awareness in Europe only came after we took them out. And this is actually a nice explanation that stopping the uses of antibiotics in the feed has a direct consequence for your fat digestion. So as a company, or from our perspective, it's also a reason to re-evaluate the application of emulsifiers. If we know that taking out antibiotics reduces the fat digestion, maybe we should reconsider of putting these concepts back into the diet or look at other ways to increase the fat absorption. So I'm getting close to my finalization. So a few take-home messages. First of all, A healthy microbiome in relation to human health is already an important issue, but we are definitely not there yet. And we expect that up to 2050, there will be governmental pressure working also in the reduction of antibiotics for therapeutic use, also outside Europe. I believe to have a good insight in gut health is important to understand how feed interventions work, whether it's through feed additives or functional ingredients. What we also see is that the development and speed of development of novel methods for analytics is increasing, and biomarkers are certainly very interesting to create quick insight in how gut health is actually at the moment. And lastly, feed additives can have a good basis for intervention, and that can be directly in relation to the microbiome, specifically through mechanisms of enzyme production, short-chain fatty acids, or bile salt conjugation. And to close, I believe that gaining quick insight in gut health allows you to pick the best solution for today, but also for your future goals. Thank you very much. And if you have a lot of questions, I will happy to address those during the discussion.
Thank you, Arno, for expanding our understanding of advanced nutritional solution. Next, please welcome Professor Julien Wiseman, Emeritus Professor at University of Nottingham. Professor Wiseman is internationally recognized for his decades of research in feed ingredients evaluation, in the energy system and feed additive science, influencing formulation practices globally. Today he will speak on the topic next generation of feed additive and where we are heading. And again, if you have any question for Julien, please drop your question into our QR code.
Okay.
Now, Professor Julien is ready. Over to you, Julien.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for Progressors for inviting me here this afternoon, and for Etherlex for sponsoring my transport, my travel. Okay, next generation, where are we going the next 5 years? You're probably all familiar with this One Health concept. It's been around for quite some time. I've used it myself in the past, but it's very topical at the moment in the context of the future use of feed additives. Why is this? Well, this is the problem. It's been discussed and mentioned already this afternoon and this morning as well. Antibiotic resistance is a real threat to both animal and human health. And 70% of antibiotics are currently used in livestock, both as therapeutic additives, but also as growth promoters. So here's the One Health concept. We're looking at animal health, looking at human health, and environmental health, which therefore means looking at the feed, we feed animals, the biosecurity and hygiene, and also good farm management. So this One Health concept is not confined to animal activities. It's important for human and environmental control as well. This is the point. You really must stop using them as growth promoters in animal feeding. What is the future focus? We must get rid of the use of them in animal diets. So there are lots of ways of looking at this. What can we do to replace antibiotics? We can look at things like farm management. We can look at biosecurity on farms, look at hygiene, look at health programs, and these will all help us to reduce or, in fact, remove the use of antibiotics in farm animals. But my talk today is really concerned about nutrition What are we doing for this in the future? Well, traditionally, if we're trying to improve bird health, then we have the use of vaccines, we have the use of bacteriophages. We can also look at the diet itself. We can look at reducing crude protein. I'm still amazed how the feed industry relies upon crude protein declarations in quality control. It should not do this. We can improve nutrient and energy digestibility and more accurate balancing of nutrient and energy concentrations in diets. But the innovative approach that I want to address is looking at gut health and performance. And so we'll look at some molecules that might become important in future years. Don't forget, we've mentioned so far looking at the performance of birds in terms of intake, growth rate, and feed conversion. Please do not forget about poultry products. Not just the bird itself, but what comes from the bird. And here we have an approach which has already been mentioned. Gordon mentioned it in his presentation this morning. Look at the consumer. It's not a question of simply, do they eat eggs or not? It's a question of, we're now looking at what eggs are useful for. They're convenient, they're protein-rich, health-conscious consumers. What else can eggs do? Right, we can have them as processed products in terms of dried, liquid or frozen. They can be used in baking, confectionery, ready to eat, soups and sauces. And demand is increasing in Southeast Asia, particularly India and China. If you look at the projections for the egg processing market, then Southeast Asia will be the most important area in the next few years, as this slide shows. I don't like using this arrow. It doesn't like me. Now, you press it, it's gone to sleep. So I shall point from now onwards. Okay, the orange one is the Asia-Pacific projection. You can see that the egg processing market is predicted to increase. Our health-conscious consumer, what will they begin to think if within their egg products are antibiotic residues? Huh? What will that do to the market? We could do a similar analysis for broiler meat, showing a very similar analysis, the risks of antibiotic residues in these products. Well, I came across this only a couple of weeks ago, end of January. Antibiotic residues hit shrimp exports to the EU. This is not a shrimp seminar today, but the important thing is same principle. 7 containers of shrimps exported from the Odisha failed EU quality checks. The consignments were refused. And the key point is that export sustainability depends on prevention, not post-rejection damage control. And these were a couple of suggestions in the article on LinkedIn. What's the way forward? You can see here, antibiotic-free farming protocols, strong hatchery and feed audits, and so on. Okay, this is shrimps, but the same would apply to the broiler and egg market. Let's begin with a few projections now. What are the problems facing us? Raw material quality. We're having supply chain reductions are now becoming quite common, which means more reliance upon locally resourced ingredients, which has quality issues. And these are the problems we've identified: mycotoxins, microbial contamination, anti-nutritional factors. Mycotoxins, we all know the importance of these. We also know the damage they can do. The key point is there are over 600 mycotoxins identifiable. There are a lot of them. Okay, if you now look at the result of contamination with mycotoxins, we're talking about the economic impact approaching 15% in the broiler sector. Don't forget that the actual economic impact is influenced by the toxin type and the exposure level. What can we do about this? Binding has now become a very important mitigating factor in trying to reduce the impact of mycotoxins, but some mycotoxins are not bound by these binders. So here we have a new development using enzyme solutions, and enzymes which attack individual mycotoxins. And we're looking at particular enzymes which can denature the mycotoxin's actual chemical structure. So this is the key point here is that binders have been useful in the past, but they are limited in their efficacy, and that means that using enzyme solutions will become a new development to look at more closely. And here we have an example of what I'm talking about. The left-hand column, forget the arrow, the left-hand column, typical mycotoxins. And then the key enzymes which will attack the mycotoxin, the source of these particular enzymes and what they do. What you can see here, that they destroy a certain part of the chemical structure of the mycotoxins. Well, once that chemical structure has been destroyed, they have no efficacy. So it's a very useful way of destroying mycotoxins and the damage they can do. So the key message here is that certain enzymes will attack certain mycotoxins to denature mycotoxin efficacy. There we are. They are irreversible. Once the mycotoxin structure has been destroyed, that's it. They're no longer damaging. So again, to look at all the approaches we can adopt in trying to denature mycotoxins, we can have here a clay bentonite, which is known to be a binder. We've already established that they will not bind all mycotoxins, so efficacy will be limited. Humic acid is a new development, which I should discuss in the next couple of slides. It has an effect as a binder, but it's rather limited. Then we have the enzyme only. We've already established that enzymes can be effective because they destroy mycotoxin structure. Then we have the combined solution. So the future, I suspect, the future is combining different mitigating approaches to use a complex of approaches to denature mycotoxins and their efficacy. So here we have, the future is what I call precision strategies applied at specific life stages of the birds and to specific mycotoxins. This is the future. So humic acid, I mentioned that. We all know what humic acid is. It's a complex high molecular weight compound. Where do we find it? Well, it's a natural compound found in decayed plant residues, material and ground coal. It can be extracted quite easily. It does contain trace minerals that can be quite useful for plant agriculture. It's available as an ingredient for animal feeds. It will contain compounds which are phytogenic. It will have specific chemical structure, which we'll look at in the next slide. There we are. So the molecular structure has a high binding or chelating capacity. It will bind mycotoxins and heavy metals. It's a bit like how clays work and yeast cells. It can also act as an antioxidant and provide a protective effect to the intestine and liver. And here's the structure. So it is not a uniform structure. It's variable depending upon the rings it has. Here's an example of the 4 rings, which you'll find in different humic acid complexes. Okay? So they act as versatile mycotoxin binders, but also provide gut and liver protection using its natural chemistry, depending upon the ring structure. Right, let's move on to the bacterial challenge. This slide perhaps ought to have come earlier, but why not? It's here now. So what I'm talking about is what are the common bacterial challenges? I've got a list of various pathogens here. I'm looking at their structure in terms of gram positive or gram negative. I'm then looking at the main disease or challenge, and I'm looking at the key concerns. So the left-hand column, we have very well-known bacteria. You've all heard about these. Then we have their structure, whether they're gram negative or gram positive. The third column that's the important one. What do they do if they're present? Well, we all know there's a whole range of disease conditions which will occur with the presence of these bacteria. The fourth column, what's the effect on the bird? Well, yes, okay, we can see this. What's going to concern us also? What is the effect on the human consumer? Food safety. Salmonella is a killer of human consumers. Similarly, you've got Campylobacter as human health issues. So it's not simply a question of reducing flock performance or increasing flock mortality, it's also the possible risk of human poisoning from consuming products that contain these bacteria. Antimicrobial resistance is a growing challenge. Most of these bacteria on the left-hand column, you will have strains which are resistant to antibiotics, which is not very good for the bird itself, because you cannot treat a disease condition. What about the human consumer? That consumes products that contain these microbes. They go to the doctor with a disease condition. Sorry, antibiotics will no longer cure that disease condition. Wow. What's that doing to future human mortality? So, some of the molecules gain in importance in terms of trying to minimize or eliminate the effects of these bacteria. Medium-chain fatty acids have become quite interesting. And we're talking about chain lengths between 6 and 12 carbon atoms. The source is mainly coconut and palm oils. Here we have your basic biochemistry from all those years ago. This is the carbon chain length, efficacy in terms of pathogen reduction, and it's the last one. Lauric acid is perhaps the most effective, perhaps, I'm not saying it is, perhaps the most effective. It will offer both antimicrobial and antiviral load reduction effects. Basic lauric acid chemistry, it's got 12 atoms of carbon. Again, so palm kernel oil does contain a collection of these fatty acids, and the single most important compound, dodecanoic acid. Dodecanoic is the posh way of saying lauric, by the way. So here's an example of the compound, glycerol monomer, GML, by various processing conditions, a product with about 90% of GML. How is this achieved? Efficient processes with the palm kernel oil. So it's a refining process. You remove the glycerol, and then you maximize monoglyceride formation. You do get some ditriglycerides present as well. And it's via a catalyst enzyme process control. So you get a product that is concentrated GML. So alpha monomer, okay, this is the monoglyceride just with one fatty acid, the diglyceride with 2, triglyceride with 3. So the alpha position will define the efficacy of AML. So what does it do? Well, the results of various programs have established that it will disrupt bacterial membranes, will enter the cell and reduce the pH of the contents, will interfere with DNA and protein synthesis, destabilize enveloped viruses, and modulate the host response, immune response. And so AML will function in the gut but also act systemically, impacting the blood and lymphatic system of animals and birds. Okay, so that's AML, but another improvement to AML can be emulsifying it. And for example, we've got emulsifying AML will further increase molecular biopotency. And here we have an experiment. You've got the bacterial strains, E. coli and S. and you've got the bisphenol monolaurate, control 600, 1200 parts per billion. And we've got here an inhibition ratio. I'll define that later on. Not a very good response there, but if you emulsify product, you can see here that the inhibition ratio is much improved. This is how you define inhibition ratio. CFU is colony forming unit. This may work out the inhibition ratio. And so the conclusion from this particular program was that emulsification can improve the antimicrobial activity of monolaurin. So here we have a bit more about short and medium chain length fatty acids. Okay? And here we're talking about mixing molecules which are good efficacy. By mixing them together, you get improved efficacy. We call synergism. In other words, the response is better than the two individuals. Combine them together, and the improvement is greater. And the overall result is reducing the prevalence of bacteria which are pathogenic, supporting a healthier gut microbiome, and will promote better digestion and nutrient absorption. By the way, we've not mentioned human health yet. We have in one context, but there are many human products around having a similar result. And there are many products available on the human market which will have the same effect. So, basically, blending AML and short-chain fatty acid blends will strengthen the gut barrier, suppress pathogens, and will support overall flock vitality, giving a proven AGP alternative. So here we have a succession of suggestions to try and promote the health of the gut microbiome, to reduce concentration of pathogens, to make for a healthier bird, and ultimately a safer product for the human consumer. Enzymes. These have been around for quite some time. A lot of the work on enzymes has been done in my laboratory at Nottingham. And to start about looking at non-starch polysaccharides. Now, these are not digested by the bird. What's the problem with NSPs? Okay? We've known this for some time. I've worked on this for many, many years. Their presence, one of the key results of high levels of NSP is increased digestive viscosity. In other words, a more viscous, a more sticky digester. What's that going to do? It, of course, will lead to poorer performance, compromised welfare, deterioration in product quality. Because a sticky digester reduces enzyme activity and reduces nutrient absorption. If it's sticky, it's quite a simple approach there. The results you'll see in practice, wet litter, very common problem in the broiler industry, and very often be linked to the presence of non-starch polysaccharides. Okay, so over the last few decades, the use of NSP enzymes, NSPases, have been added to diets now for some considerable time. They'll break down the NSPs to an extent, and hopefully in so doing will unlock energy, protein, and minerals, leading to an improvement in food conversion ratio, reduction in feed costs, support consistent flock performance, even with the fluctuating raw material quality. And they'll support better gut health, a cleaner litter, and fewer digestive problems occurring in climate-ruining systems, common in Southeast Asia. So it's not just the disruption of the NSPs that these enzymes do. Some recent work from Nottingham has shown that some enzymes will interact with gut hormones to promote, in this case, the increase in glucose uptake. So NSPs have got perhaps an additional function than the ones we've traditionally thought about. So, the next generation, I've done some work on this, the next generation, we're looking at multiple NSP blends, not just a single NSPase, but blends. Why are we talking about blends? That's on the next slide. Don't forget phytase, by the way. Sorry about that. Enzymes plus emulsifiers. What are the possible improvements to this? They'll break down over the matrix, enhance nutrient substrate availability for enzyme action, better solubility, dispersion, and digestibility, and increased gelatinization potential and prevents starch retrogradation, and improved energy and amino acid availability. These are all possible improvements by the use of multiple enzymes. The thing is that these will apply to carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. So emulsification is now another improvement which may improve the action of these modifiers. Okay, here are three of them: sodium asterol, glycerin monostearate, and distilled monoglyceride. These are emulsification agents which may improve the action. So let's look at starch and carbohydrates. People often think that starch is a very simple molecule. It's a glucose polymer, yes, but it's very, very intricately bound on itself. It's quite a complicated molecule, and it does suffer from overheating, making retrograde starch more important, and that's not digestible. So it could well be that emulsification may reduce the risk of retrogradation, particularly during pelleting. That's the next one. So high temperature pelleting with a high starch diet may give rise to retrograde starch, which is reduced digestibility, which you don't want. So reduction of retrogradation. Some of the work that's been done with me in food science, food chemistry, has just looked at what happens to starch when you heat it. Retrogradation is a key problem. So emulsification may improve starch digestibility even following processing, reducing the risk of retrogradation. What about protein? Preventing protein aggregates, therefore making it more digestible. Better protein solubility. The protein would dissolve better in the gut, making digestion more efficient. Therefore, enhancing amino acid availability, digestibility. Unlocks tightly bound protein, releasing more essential amino acids, and supports the growth of lean tissue. Now, these categories here are quite important. In my country, we're not allowed to use animal proteins in broiler and egg-laying diets. They've been banned for some time, so we are reliant upon plant proteins. We have to use them. The problem is that plant proteins are inherently less digestible because of their structure. That is why, when it comes to looking at protein digestibility, by using proteases and emulsifiers, we've had to go down this route. We have no choice. This is quite important for us. But it's also important for Southeast Asia. Okay, you use animal proteins, but you're reliant upon soya, aren't you, as well? So these points here would apply equally to Southeast Asia. Fats and lipids. Well, some of you may know that I'm the fat man of Nottingham. All right, that's not because of my waistline. I've done a lot of work with fat over the years. So emulsification, I know, I've done some work on this, will improve fat digestibility because, again, we're going back to pelleting as well, make the fat molecules more uniform. Emulsification will reduce the droplet size considerably, and that's very important in the overall digestion process of fats and oils. What about fat-soluble nutrients? Yeah, the key vitamins, A, D, E, and K, which are fat-soluble, and the carotenoids. And again, whenever you improve digestibility, you have less coming out in the excreta. That applies to anything. Anything. So the future of enzyme blends, as I said, we're looking now towards multi-enzyme blends, not just one particular enzyme, but multi-enzyme blends with digestibility enhancers, emulsifiers, to improve nutritional bioavailability. And again, I've mentioned this point a bit earlier. Please do not forget that NSPs are a highly complex group of molecules, and then enzyme action must accommodate these variations, hence why multi-enzyme complexes are important. It is my attempt to show the variability in NSPs, combinations of pentasans, 5 carbon, hexasans, 6, and then mixed cyanoglucans and cellulose. So that's a very important point. NSPs, notice the plural, NSPs are diverse in their structure and therefore will require a range of enzymes to denature them. ANFs, anti-nutritional factors. I'm just going to give you one example here. A large number of naturally occurring ANFs found in plant products. Those which are present in seeds are the ones that are relevant for poultry. Perhaps the best known one is found in raw soybeans are the trypsin inhibitors. What do? They interfere with protein digestibility, and this is another health issue. If protein is lower digestibility, where does that protein go? Into the hindgut. And what does it do there? It's a substrate for bacteria. And because we are reliant upon soybeans, mainly in my country, we see an increase in necrotic enteritis. Too much protein is ending up in the hindgut. So what do we do with soybean, for example? We heat process it. And here's a common assumption. It's often assumed that TIs are denatured by heat treatment, giving a constant product of good nutritional value. No, that is not the case. I have data which show the variability in commercially available soybean meals, which means that quality control is crucially important. The problem with measuring TIs in soybean samples, for example, is expensive, time-consuming, and requires expensive equipment, reagents, plus a skilled technician. That's why companies do not want to do this as part of their QC. Is there a future? Yes. The new developments in analyzing soybean for the trypsin inhibitors, NIR. And that's now becoming an accepted technology for the future, because it gets around the problem of the cost and time taken to look at the TIs in soy products. Raw material variability. I mentioned earlier on that we're now looking at locally sourced raw materials because of supply chain problems. Many raw materials now are co-products of other processes. An example would be bioethanol. People producing bioethanol want to get maximum ethanol yield per ton of grain. They don't care about the co-product, DDGS, which is wet. It must be dried very quickly to make it so you can store it for some time. But if you dry something at high temperature quickly, what happens? You reduce amino acid availability. And here's some more Nottingham data with DDGS. Lysine, 74% digestible, compared with methionine, 92, threonine, 97. This is a problem with a co-product from the production of bioethanol. And they're also high in mycotoxins as well. So we are becoming reliant upon these co-products, but don't think they're okay, because they're not, they have problems. Raw material variability is a major concern, particularly in unconventional ingredients becoming more common. Right, to wrap up the talk, I want to move into phytogenics, becoming an increasingly more important and interesting area. Traditionally, these compounds have been used for generations in human medicine. We all know which herbs to take for certain conditions, and they appear to work. So the practice of using them has been there for some time. But we're now moving towards more science, trying to establish the more effective molecules within these products. What are the advantages? There's no residues, no withdrawal periods, no resistance issues. So we're looking at these particular molecules rather than the actual plant itself. What are the benefits of these phytobioactives? They can address these challenges without causing microbial resistance risks. They will meet, hopefully, future regulatory and consumer safety expectations. They hopefully will improve gut health and nutrient utilization for a better return on investment. We're back to money. Always follow the money, whatever you're doing. And accessing premium markets requiring antibiotic-free residues by a health-conscious consumer is with us again. So to conclude, with my key takeaways, I've got 36 seconds. Okay? Developing alternatives to antibiotics is essential. The health of the poultry, the health of the consumer, and the health of the environment. And don't forget the market for poultry products. Again, our health-conscious consumer. But it's everybody. It's not just those with a bit of money to spend. Anybody who consumes eggs or poultry meat, they don't want to consume bacteria. We've had a look at several feed supplements showing considerable promise, acidifiers, short-chain, medium-chain fatty acids, probiotics, phytochemicals, enzymes, digestibility enhancers, and advanced mycotoxin mitigation strategies. Okay, back to One Health. It's a holistic approach. That means it must cover everything. And all aspects we discussed are important, together with, I mentioned, raw material quality and safety, and biosecurity, covering all aspects.
We need the unburning certificate. Thailand is the first country that request for the unburning certificate. So they have some difficulty to get the. And also, we need to have the guarantee price to the farmer, 9.8 baht per kilo for the 14.5 moisture, and 7 baht per kilo for the 30% moisture to the farmer. Cassava, we also import 10 million metric tons equivalent with the Cambodia 20%. And we cultivate in Thailand 30 million metric tons. So we import 25%. And we export to China around almost 60%
นี่เมื่อกี้หนุ่ย
for the all supply. And rice, we export 8.8 million metric tons to 2023, increase to 9.4 million metric tons, and reduce to 8 million metric tons the last year. That is 20% reduce from 2024. So we copied the India low price export. So last year, Thai local line is the lowest with the 9 baht. And also we need to import T-ber 1. We import 2.5 million metric tons and reduce to 1.8 million metric tons. And also feed wheat is cheaper than local corn, but US corn is cheaper than feed wheat, but we still not getting. So in Thailand, we have many regulatory for the government. For the corn, we need the 8.9 million tons, but we have only 5 million tons with the low production efficiency and unsuitable area because of almost 50% is not the right to cultivate corn, and some 20% is cultivated in the mountain that we need to burn the fields because the tractor cannot use in the mountain. And also we need to pay the 73% outside the quota. So that's why we import only outside. And for the wheat, we don't have the domestic production, but we control by T-ber 1. And for the barley, we need to report and can import only Australia 0%. DDT, we pay 11% tariff to USA, and we need to report. And soybean meal, we have the cultivation in Thailand only 18,000 metric tons, but we demand 5 metric tons, and import tax will be 2%. And we need to guarantee the price to the local soybean in Thailand, 22 baht. And for the still, we have the IUU program and still use import tax for the 15%. With the carbon emission concern in our supply chain. So the first one is fertilizer and pesticide dosage optimization. We need to apply soil test because of in Thailand, many regulatory and government not support. And next, we need to think about the GMO with the import the GMO USA corn, and also gene editing. This is the idea of the last government. And the second one, for the clean energy, we have many apply for the solar electricity with our farm. Also, we need to arrange for the animal waste management. And the third one is the deforestation fee. We need to have the traceability system with the Thai farmer corn and send it to the collector, and after that send to the field. So we need to have some certification of unburdening for this field. That is I talk about the unburdening field. With our new law in this year is the Clean Air Act, and we need to have the hotspot satellite that I will be showing later. And also with the Department of Livestock Development, we cooperate with the low protein diet to reduce the nitrous oxide for the waste emission. And the last one is the transportation. We try to have the less packaging, usable, and bulk transportation. For our challenge, that is we need to cope with CBAM due diligence, and also PM 2.5 because of in Bangkok also serious with pollution. And last year we cope with the Trump tariff war that now we have 5 months to have the 15% tax. We also cooperate with the safety, security, and sustainability to have the standard of the PPU. And with the Department of Livestock Development, we try to have a green-free raw material working group, and also traceability with Department of Agriculture. And next step, we will have the traceability system with the government, and also help the farmer to unlearning practice. And also this is we cooperate with USEC, that is the US Soybean Export Council. This my president is Kun Pansi of the Thai Milk Association that have a sustainable practice for the soybean and soybean export to Thailand. And with our policy, no deforestation and traceability, reduce greenhouse gas emission and sustainability. With the partner of our partner is Julien, Thai Livestock and Aquatic Consortium. That is have many associations with the Thai animal, the Animal Husbandry Association, Thai Sawai, and Thai Poultry, Thai Ruminant, Thai Aquatic, and Animal Health Products. Also Thai Seed, and Dairy Shrimp Boiler. That is we combined for the PM, and also with the CPS staff. We also cooperate with the King Mongkut University of Sabury. That is try to have the carbon emission measurement for the corn, beef cattle, and milk cow and fish meat. This is our trial in the local field in the China and Sabury province. That we try to cooperate and measure the carbon actually in the 0.02 carbon kilogram carbon per kilogram product. And also talk with the Myanmar Corn Trade Association. This is the embassy of the Myanmar. This have with the corn production in Myanmar without learning. This is our traceability system. We also use satellite to check the burn scar because of the learning in the corn field is after cultivation. So we need to check the satellite at the historic record and test back with the GPS system to the settler and location and send the amount to the producer applicator and send the amount to the CPU. That's we can test back to the local GPS. So the conclusion in these 2 years, our trade policy last year we get from 36% reduced tariff to 90%. And this year, start on March, we had 50%. But we still expect to have the US material with 0% tariff. And the currency is hurt a lot because of it reduced from 32 to 34 baht per USD. Reduced to 31 baht per USD. But now it's increased to 31.5 baht per USD. The price declined in last year, but this year is increased already with the whole line. And the natural glass is also important. And with the last year, we have the 6 billion USD export for protein and shrimp. That is our challenge in this year. Because of protein also have some damage in the first quarter. And the commodity cycle in the last year is lowest price in the quarter 3, quarter 4. And amount of this year is the price lower 5 to 10%. And after war maybe increase. Corn price is decreased, competitive decreased 12% the import. And we was forced to have the guarantee price 9.8 baht per kilo. And with the limitation of this import, with unburned fuel certification, we still don't have the raw material for the corn. Soybean meal price, last year the price reduced 10 to 15%. And this year, January we not allowed to import. The government is a new government, and temporary government don't have the permission to allow. And also this year, soybean meal price still be tariff in 10%. It's not 2%. So these 2 months, you need to pay 10% first. And the price of the soybean meal still downward compared to 14.5 baht per kilo in this year. But the price in this month also a little increased. Broken rice price, we export decreased 20% and around 9 to 10.5 baht per kilo. And this year we export to increase with the corn price increase. So the broken rice will reduce in 10.5 to 11.5 baht per kilo. That is a bad news for us. We import decline from 2.5 million ton to 1.8 million ton with the price 9.3 baht per kilo. But this year, the corn price still 9.8 baht per kilo, with PP price 9 baht per kilo, and corn price US, that is, we cannot import 8.9 baht. Cassava, we export increase double because of China back to import. So we export to China 4 million tons with 6.4 baht per kilo. And starch still import stable, still export stable 4 million tons. And this year, the price will increase to 7.4 to 7.8 baht per kilo. That is a conversion to effect 5%. And also other export. So we export the last year, for the sugar more than the year before, 40%, palm oil 55%, pet food 61%, broiler 5%. That is broiler we can list many person try to region. We can list 1.2 billion. And shrimp we export reduce 7%. That is our challenge in Thai competitive state. It's our security. That is all my message.
Thank you very much, Prof, for sharing those important perspectives on sustainability and industry direction. So we will now take a short break. So please enjoy some refreshment outside the room and don't forget to visit our booth. We will resume the program at 3:30 p.m. So please return to your seat a few minutes before we begin. Thank you and enjoy your day.
कल आ रहा है देखिए और आ रहा है देखिए आपका शेड्यूल कितना How are you? Good to see you. You made it? Hey, good to see you. I'm doing well, Thank you. Yeah, this is good. It's doing well. Yeah, and then next we dish out after lunch. It was with they're doing like general Probably why they I'm getting a professional. Yes, exactly. Like I was like, asked me to do it, and I was like, okay, well, who's the audience? Some actual traders, there are plenty of people out Yeah, we just made it in for where it is, so. Yeah. It's a good job. Okay. Yeah. Well, we've been trying to Yeah. My colleague Julien is here too. His sister. There were sometimes when no, he's a good guy. Actually, he's a here that enjoy the rest of the program. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for. Sorry for coming late. Thanks for. It's good to see the aspects of. Absolutely. Okay. Good to see you in a minute.
下午那个因为这个假期才能报名的，或者说你晚上不出去，这个住下，他我边不给你讲，不记不记得那不记得怎样的。
Sometimes you write, you get for a long
आप पूरी मीटिंग में बात करते हैं पूरा लाइफ में बात करता
Presents lucky.
घुमा दो एक बार
मैंने चौपड़ी नहीं कोई है को नहीं कोई देख कौन है इन्हों अटेंड करना दिखेगा
राजन में क्या
कुछ है
आप नहीं आप
एविजन में कुछ दिया अपने कॉमन चीज़ तो सब दो चीज़ें हैं तो भाई सोचता कंपनी बड़ी नहीं है पर सोच गिफ्ट कहीं देना बात सोच वो तो सोचने ना क्या होगा ये ना कुछ डिफरेंट है एविजन वाला कुछ अलग
क्या
ये मिडिल ईस्ट पूरा खाली है सब लोग आवे नहीं जा रहे अच्छा ये नहीं आ रहे बस में
बटन
చాలా టైం वैसे पानी ना
साथ में
वो मत
एग्जीबिशन घूमने तो वो लेना था
जरी
डेकोरेट करना था सोचते मुझे आ गया लगा के 4 बजे दिने
पड़ेगा उठानी पड़ेगा
वो खुद विक्रम
लागू है ना लागे सपोर्ट अगर कोई या आएगी अलाद खाने में 3 लोग देख रहे हो
तो तैयारी करते हैं
निकालो ना 80% ऊपर पहुंच रहा है
में तो है नहीं 4-5 आना बचपन में है गुजारा हुआ तो बात 30 तो 25 हो गया
ಅಲ್ಲಲ್ಲ ಸರ್ ಗಿಡ ಉಳಿದು ಸರ್ ಕಾನ್ಸಂಟ್ರೇಷನ್ ಹೆಂಗಾದ್ರೆ ಗಿಡ ಉಳಿದು ಸರ್ ಎರಡು ಬಂದ್ರೆ ಲಾಸ್ಟ್ ಟೈಮ್
हमें तो
सेक्रेटरी साहब नहीं ये कटा बाकी वहाँ चले जाए
चाहते हैं
साइड में शुरू साइड में चाले जाओ मलिकड़ एक्सटेंड
इसको स्ट्रिक्टली फॉलो करें जब तक ऊपर से चालू
सड़क में बिल्कुल मॉडरेशन करो बस 4 बजे तक
लगा देंगे
ಇದು 1 ಅವರ್ ಇದ್ರೆ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದಲ್ವಾ? ಅಷ್ಟರಲ್ಲಿ ಸ್ಯಾನಿರೆಲ್ಲ ಬಂದಿರುತ್ತಲ್ಲ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಸರಿ ಆಯಿತು ತೀರಾ ಅರ್ಜೆಂಟ್ ಇದೆ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಕಳಿಸ್ತೀನಿ
कैलकुलेशन करने के लिए करना
करें
सॉल्यूशन और और सर क्या सर थोड़ा लेट का मत सर हाँ
ಸರಿ ಸರ್ ಟೋಟಲ್ ಪ್ರೈಸ್ ಆಮೇಲೆ ಆಮೇಲೆ ಮಾರ್ಕೆಟ್ ಕಳಿಸ್ತೀನಿ ಬಿಲ್ಲಿಲ್ಲ ಪರವಾಗಿಲ್ಲ ಇದು ಬಿಲ್ ಕಳಿಸ್ತೀನಿ ಪರವಾಗಿಲ್ವ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಅಪ್ಡೇಟ್ ಇದೆ ಹೌದು ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಸರ್ ನಾನು ಹೇಳಿದ್ದು ಒಂದು ಮಾತು ಸರಿ ಸರ್ ಆಯ್ತು ಲಿಯೋ ಫ್ಲಕ್ಸ್ 1 ಲೀಟರ್ ಬೇಕಾ ಇದು ಯಾವುದು ಅಲ್ಲ ಸರಿ ಸರ್ ಓಕೆ ಇವಾಗ ಫೀಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀರಾ ಅಂತ ಕಳಿಸ್ಕೊಡ್ತೀನಿ ಓಕೆನಾ ಸರ್
ಓಕೆ
Here he is. Don't worry, Julien. Which one do you got?
Welcome back everyone. We will now move into our discussion session. Discussion session was moderated by Mr. Edward and Esther, Global Commercial Lecturer at Okay, now we are ready. Mr. Prof. Mr. Anowandra, Professor Julien Wiseman, Mr. Prof. Sometimes and of course our lecturer, Mr. Edward and Esther. So please join me in welcoming them.
Yes.
Okay, Edward, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. I think also just before we start this afternoon's session, a big shout out and thank you to Giannis and the Progressive team for organising today's seminar. I think today's forum. I think it's really been an excellent program so far. I'm very pleased to be able to moderate the Q&A session for the 4 speakers that we've heard earlier. So obviously starting with Gordon just before lunch, I think, Gordon, and then we broke out for lunch, and then followed by obviously Arnold, Julien, and Sompol. I think Gordon set the scene quite nicely when he's really talking about consumer demand, of the change in consumer demand. And also some of the supply chain disruptions that's there in the industry. I think it was very topical because then when we start hearing the changing consumer demands, Arno then talking really on the importance of the feeding the microbiome. And I think there was some really interesting aspects there, highlighting that. And then leading to Julien really talking on a little bit of One Health and the challenges of antimicrobial resistance and things like this. They all synergize together. I'd say not only the safety emissions, it's also the supply chain disruptions and the challenges that you've got in raw material supply here in Thailand. So I think it was really a very, very interesting afternoon session. We've got a number of questions that have come through, so I have to take my glasses off to read these. But I think we'll start actually. We'll start with a question to. We might as well start with Gordon because you were the first one. But it's really based on your market analysis. What's the biggest challenge you see for the poultry industry in South Asia, India, Sri Lanka particularly?
A few years ago, I was asked for a presentation in India, but their main thing is that they want to export. But for export, you have to have government, your association, and the companies. They have to have a strong between the three. And at the moment, India does not have that. So it's to build a reputation for food quality for the rest of the world. The biggest challenge, but we can actually believe everything that's said.
Yes, the export, the challenges for that expansion.
And also in India, the problem are language. You send to a veterinarian 30 kilometers away, and they don't understand each other.
I think it's interesting, but very challenging market anyway. I know we've got a lot of Indians here today. Thanks for that, Gordon. I think we've got an interesting one next, and it can probably go to Julien and Arno, I'd say. You can decide who's best to answer it. What's your thought on using bile acids against emulsifiers in feed?
Don't bother. Why not? Bile acids are produced in quite large quantities by the chicken, and they are effective in contributing towards fat digestibility. They're then recycled, so they're not lost in the extruder. They're recycled back to be used again. So they're recycled. If you add bile acids to a diet, you're reducing the efficiency of this circulation. It's not really going to work. Bile acids are degraded by bacteria. So people are often thinking, well, if you've got bile salt degradation by a bacteria, then you should add more bile salts. Okay, that's one approach. The other approach is get rid of the bacteria with antibiotics. It's not a very good idea either. So part of the One Health approach is to consider why are you getting low fat digestibility? Because of the breakdown of the bile acids, and therefore we should consider ways and means of reducing the pathogenic bacteria that degrade bile acids. So bottom line is, adding bile acids is not an effective approach.
Yeah, thank you, Julien. I would agree on that, but maybe a small addition there as well. If we look at fat digestion as such, one can consider lipase, but exogenous lipase supplementation has also not always been proven to be very effective. In general, I would say lipase production by mature animals is strong enough. Maybe young animals could still use a little bit, but most limiting factor appears to be the emulsification. And as Julien already said, emulsification by nature is done partially by bile salts. But now, with more and more antibiotic-free diets coming on, the conjugation starts to become more important. And then, in our view, it's more interesting to research the application of exogenous emulsifiers in the diet.
Yeah, no, thanks. I think you also, we've got another question here, but I think you've answered it, which is talking about using exogenous lipase. And I think you just, you covered that. So I think answered two questions with with one approach there. So. The next question, and again, it's probably coming back to Julien on this, but it's a scope, and I think particularly relevant for Southeast Asia and South Asia. But the scope of xylanase and NSP enzymes in corn-based diets, can they elicit the same response as we see in wheat-based diets?
Yes, certainly. Although the NSP concentration in corn is much lower, not much, it's a bit lower than in wheat. That's one thing to say. The second thing is that the NSPs in corn and wheat are not the same. So when we're talking about adding NSPase enzymes to any cereal-based diet, the enzyme package would differ depending upon whether corn or wheat is the predominant cereal there.
That's Again, I'll keep it on with you, Julien. You've got the microphone. Recommended equipment and methods available for trypsin inhibitors.
Yes.
You mentioned NIR.
It's quite a complicated assay, which requires complicated equipment and reagents. There's a standard protocol for measuring trypsin inhibitor activity, and this protocol is freely available. So I wouldn't want to discuss which equipment you need because the protocols are available publicly. My point in my presentation was it's a lengthy process, takes a couple of days. Even I have done it, by the way, when I was a bit younger. It takes a couple of days. It takes a fairly competent technician, and I think I'm fairly competent. And it's not very good in quality control because quality control laboratories in the feed industry need a rapid answer. Because you've got a lorry load of soybean meal that's come in, you need to know in the next couple of hours, is that soybean meal high, medium, or low trypsin inhibitor activity present? You cannot assume it's always low. That was my point. We've done a lot of analyses of UK soybean meals, and the variability is quite serious. So you can't assume they're all good quality. However, as I said, to have a laboratory doing the assay is expensive. That is why I mentioned that NIR is now becoming a useful measurement of trypsin inhibitor activity. It takes a couple of minutes. And that is now becoming an important technology, and it should be used. Because you cannot assume that all soybean meals are the same quality, they are not.
Thank you, Julien. The question for some Prof, is how is Thailand planning to control CO2 emissions in the poultry industry, farm, feed mill, and processing plants? So controlling the CO2 emissions.
The sixth point that I presented in CO2 emission in our industry. But mostly we focus on solar system because of it is very easy to implement. For example, in farm we have the roof and that we can install the solar system and we reduce the energy of the natural gas, of the oil, and we can reduce the fossil. And we have many steps in the implement for the carbon emission. For example, with the Department of Livestock Development and Kasetsart University, we try to have the low protein diet to reduce the carbon oxide. And we want to unburn the fuel of the corn and agriculture in Thailand. The corn in Thailand is not the first agriculture that have burning fuel. Mostly is rice. The second one is sugarcane. Is sugarcane. Because we export the rice and sugarcane a lot, more than 3,000 million US. And the third one is the corn. And the government want us, the feed mill, to be the first implementer of the unburning fuel. Because of they cannot control the rice and sugarcane. They want to control for the corn. So it's, if burning the fuel, carbon emission will triple of the kilogram per ton. So we want to cut off the carbon emission of the.
It is a little bit later because then, in terms of successfully implementing those strategies, what's the biggest challenge or the bottleneck in terms of the actual implementation of it?
Very difficult to educate the farmer that not learning. That is the first implementation that is about because of we need to provide the equipment. We need to provide the way how to cultivate with the not learning the food. That is we need to we need to do and implement more.
It's probably not. I'm just thinking it's probably not something that's just limited only to Thailand. When you look at these burden policies, which are very prevalent across a lot of Asia.
Yes, that's why Thailand is the first country that asked for the unburning the fuel for certification.
Thank you. Question for Arnold. So, can you explain how naturally produced butyrates influence the spore gut? And does it mean traveling? Does it mean it travels from the colon to the duodenum?
No, the reverse traveling I don't think occurs. What typically happens is mainly the gene regulation route. So there are receptors in the hindgut called T fatty acid receptors that anticipate on butyric acid, and as such you get
a feedback loop to the gastric acid, for instance, but also production of pancreas and growth hormone regulation, even to the level of the tight junction. So that feedback loop based on butyric acid produced in the hindgut or bleaching the hindgut is the way how it influences the small intestines.
We'll now jump over. I'm now going to jump over to Gordon again, and it's in terms of current nutrition. In terms of the current nutrition practices due to the geopolitical situation, what sort of disruptions do you see in terms of implementing nutritional practices?
Well, it's the source of all the raw materials. I think we're fortunate that most of the vitamins, etc., come from China. But the big thing is that there's no problem with soybeans because that's coming from Latin America or North America. Corn's not a big problem. It's more the final products that are a problem more than the actual ingredients, etc. I don't see any problem at the moment until we have another conflict somewhere about getting anything for feed.
Yeah, I think reading into that question is, I think Julien touched on it, is creating more opportunities now for locally sourced materials and diversified materials. And so something a little bit related to this is if you start looking at microbial viral challenges, etc., which is better, alpha-monoline or a combination of caprylic and caprylic acids as an MCFA blend? I think you did touch on it in terms of the.
I think that we mentioned in my talk about the using blends of material, and we touched upon the importance of emulsifiers as being effective in allowing the fatty acids to be more effective. So a blend of emulsifier and medium and short chain fatty acids would be a more effective mixture than just the fatty acids themselves.
Yeah. So really look at like blends and you mentioned also synergistic effects.
Yes.
Yeah, through different molecules.
Yes.
And then now we go back to Arno, because from parameters being checked by Floratis, by parameters being checked by Floratis, would it be possible to differentiate gut health issues coming from nutrition or non-nutrition parameters?
I think to quite high level. So at the moment, screening is done on 3 indexes. One is the hygiene index, which is not so much related to nutritional issues. The second one is the gut damage ratio, which may have a little influence of nutritional approach, mostly if there is substrate moving to the hindgut and then, for instance, causing more Clostridium and through that way causing more necrotic enteritis, then you get more inflammation in the gut. And in that sense, there might be a small relation, but the biggest relation on the nutritional part is on the productivity effect. So with the short chain fatty acids, measuring the ratio for butyric acid producers and lactic acid producers.
Nice answer. I come again now, and this one I'm not familiar with this. It goes to Julien. But what are your thoughts on the use of invertase? What are your thoughts on the use of invertase enzyme as a combination with other cocktail enzymes? Invertase.
Invertase splits sucrose into glucose and fructose. Why would you want to add invertase when the chicken produces enough? So, sucrose is not a non-starch polysaccharide. We've already discussed about non-starch polysaccharides being complex carbohydrate molecules and will benefit from a cocktail of enzymes. Well, the chicken produces invertase. I don't personally see what the benefit of adding more to the diet would be. Splitting sucrose into glucose and fructose, the chicken does that anyway. So, I don't want to sound negative again, as I was about the wild salt, but I'm negative here as well. I don't see the reason for adding invertase.
Yeah, I was not familiar with invertase, so it wasn't something I was familiar with. We've actually covered most. There's been a crossover on some of these questions, so that's why we picked out some and answered most of them, which have crossed across the different ones. Maybe one for Julien, last one for Julien, and then we can open it for some final comments from the floor. But how emulsifiers improve gelatinization and reduce Maillard's reaction?
I think that's a combination of two questions. I'll take the starch one first. Starch is a glucose polymer. People think it's quite simple. It's a glucose polymer, but it has some extremely interesting and complicated, rings as well. So starch is quite difficult to digest if it's too packed together, which happens during pelleting. And pelleting will increase the risk of retrograde starch, which is not digested and goes into the hindgut, and is therefore a bacterial substrate. So the second thing is you need water to digest. Enzymes only operate in an aqueous environment. So if you have the risk of starch becoming even more compact, particularly during the pelleting process, it means that you will not get the same entry of water into the molecule. You also get accompanying retrograde starch being produced, so you can have a problem of poor digestibility. That's why some emulsifying agents added will prevent this problem. That's why emulsifiers can have an effect on improving starch digestibility and at the same time reducing the amount of starch that's degraded. Maillard reactions are between carbohydrates and amino acids. It's a different question. So again, as I mentioned during my talk, emulsifiers will also improve protein digestibility, particularly if the protein structures is very complicated, and therefore you normally get a lower protein digestion. And as I said, plant proteins are less well digested than animal proteins. And if you have lower digestibility, you then get more protein going into the hindgut. If that's accompanied by a possible starch retrogradation, you might get Maillard reactions. So emulsification would improve that scenario as well.
Yeah, no, I think also even from the like emulsifiers or digestive enhancers, which I think was spoken about during this afternoon. Also, when you look at it from the food ingredient perspective, a lot of them call it texturizers and also emulsifiers and texturizing agents. And so I think this is the effect that it's having on also starch, different molecules and things like that.
It's also important in the human food industry.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. The use in the human food, which I think you're taking the benefits of these molecules in human food and now seeing how those benefits can relay back into the livestock feed production. So I think just in the interest of time, Again, I think really, very interesting afternoon session so far, and the next afternoon session I'm absolutely sure is going to be interesting as well. But just some final comments from the speakers about what we did today.
I'm reminded of an event at Biome many years ago. The theme was expect the unexpected. That is our word today.
Thank you. That inviting me to have a discussion. I also learning from many speakers. I just learned Julien and like that they show. I know this before. And I hope that we can improve our industry and supply chain to have the low carbon emission and more sustainable for the world. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think my bottom line is one of the comments I made, Prof also mentioned as well. Consumers now don't just simply eat broiler meat or eggs. Okay, they're becoming much more discerning. They're becoming a bit more health conscious. They are looking for high quality protein. Of course they are. But they're also looking for high quality, safe protein. My key point was that people are becoming concerned about antimicrobial resistance, impacts upon human health, but bacterial residues in what they're eating. They're getting very, very concerned about this. So I think that's my bottom line. The consumer is becoming much, much more important. You can't simply throw them bits of chicken or a few eggs. You've got to make sure that it's quality.
I see I have 30 seconds for my last comment.
That's all I have.
I started my lecture today with the antimicrobial resistance, and I think what that has learned us that in the past we used ATPs while not really understanding how they worked. In the beginning there was a big search for the silver bullet to replace it, but I think what we gained is much more insights on all the other elements in nutrition, how they actually function. I refer back to, for instance, Peter discussing on glutamate, which is, it's not new, but something we need to reevaluate, and also the application of emulsifiers in ATP-free diets. But I think the total understanding on how nutrition works is increasing, and to understand better how gut health is related to healthy nutrition, I think quick insights are very important. I think, and I hope that we can contribute a little bit to that.
Thank you very much indeed, everybody. It's really been a wonderful afternoon, and we pass over now to Yanis in the afternoon session. Thank you.